Hi, I am Balaji Chipada and welcome back to my channel. In continuation of our Python series for data science, in this video, let's learn everything about while loops. First, take an example that I want to print Balaji is a great teacher 100 times. What will you do? Of course, we have the brute force method where you copy paste the same sentence, print Balaji is a great teacher 100 times, and then you can execute that cell. But is it efficient? No. Is it time taking? Yes. So, how can you do it much better? Let's forget about Python first. If I ask you to say my name multiple times, let's say my name 5 times, what will you do? Initially, you will initiate a counter inside your brain and say Balaji, and you count it as 1. And then you say Balaji again and you increment the counter to 2. And you say Balaji again and you make increment the counter to 3. Like that, you will pronounce my name 5 times until the counter reaches the limit number 5, right? Similarly, until a condition is met, the while loop executes the same piece of code again and again. I hope it is clear for you guys. So let's understand this counter, condition, loop, everything in detail along with the code in the notebook. As I mentioned before initializing a while loop, you need to initialize a counter. Okay. And then you say while and you create a condition using this counter and you give colon, and inside this you have your piece of code, and once your code is done you increment the counter. We have seen this assignment operator, right? And once the increment is done, it will go back to this condition and it will check whether the condition is still valid or not. If it is valid, it comes inside the loop and it will increment the counter and it will go back again. And once the condition becomes false, it will come outside of the loop. That's how while loop works in Python. Now let's understand the same in this diagram. You enter the loop while initializing a counter and you have the expression or condition. If it is true, execute the body of the loop, which is this part, and go back to the test expression once you increase or decrease the counter. And if it is still valid, go back to the same loop and execute the body, increment or decrement, go back. And if the condition is false, exit the loop. That is how while loop works in Python. Now let's say I initialized a counter equal to 1 and I'm saying while counter less than or equal to 5, print Balaji is a great teacher, and I'm printing the counter as well here. And after this execution is done, I am saying counter plus equal to 1, which basically means increase the counter value to 2. Now let's execute this and see the output. So first let's debug this. Okay. So initially we have counter equal to 1 and this condition is true, and we'll print this print statement, and at this point the counter value is 1. So this is what we get as an output. And here the counter becomes 2 and it comes to this while condition. 2 is less than or equal to 5, which is a valid. Now it will print the same statement again, but here the counter value is 2 because we already updated it. So that is why we are getting the second line of output. And then we are making the counter to 3 and the condition is still valid, 3 less than or equal to 5, and we are getting the output with the counter value 3. And same goes for 5 and 5, 4 and 5. Now once the counter value becomes 5, it executed this line. Here we are making it 6, and it will go back to the same condition and it check whether 6 is less than or equal to 5. Because 6 is not less than 5, it will not execute this print statement and it will exit the loop. I hope you understand the flow. This is very important. Okay, here initially I added counter as 1, and in every loop I am increasing the value of the counter. This is like ascending the counter. You can do descending as well. So let's say I initialize my counter equal to 5 and I'm saying if my counter is greater than 1, print this statement, and at every statement after this decrease my counter value by 1. It's saying I is not defined, so I have to use counter here. So initially the counter value is 5 and then 4 and then 3 and then 2 and then 1. Once it becomes 0 after this statement, 0 is greater than or equal to 1, which is a false statement. That is why we exited out of this while loop. And one more thing that you need to be very conscious while building a while constructor or while loop is you need to give a condition which is finite or converges. What if I give a condition where it will never be false? In that case, your while loop code will keep on executing infinitely and it will increase your memory consumption and it will break your system. That is not at all recommended. So whenever you are using a while loop, make sure you are giving a condition. At some point the condition should become false. Okay, now can I do a nested while loop? Yes. So let's take this example, counter equal to 1, and I will initiate one more counter called counter 2, and I will keep it as 1, and inside this I will just copy paste the same code. While counter 2 less than or equal to 5, print yes, he is great. And I will just say counter 2, and after this I will increase my counter. Make sure you are increasing your counter. Counter 2 plus equal to 1. Now let's execute this. So understand the output here. So initially we have counter 1 equal to 1, counter 2 equal to 1. So first while loop, which is counter less than or equal to 5, which is true, we are printing this statement. And inside this we initially have counter 2 equal to 1, and this condition is valid. It will print s he is a great, and it will print the value of counter, and we are increasing the value of counter 2 by 1. It will become 2, and unless and until this condition becomes false, this loop will keep on executing. So unless and until this counter 2 value becomes 6, this loop will continue executing and it will get printing all of these values. And once this while loop is done, because we are inside another while loop, it will go back to the next while loop and it will continue executing the code inside the top while loop. That is how nested while loops work. Now let's say I want to get squares of numbers from a list. So how can I do it? So initially I am initializing a variable called sum of squares, which is 0, and I'm initializing a counter called index, which is 0. What I'm saying is while index less than length of numbers. So how many elements are present inside number? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So length of the numbers is 5. And what I'm saying, while index is less than 5, execute this and increase the index by 1. So what are we doing? While 0 is less than 5, which is true, we are adding the value to the sum of squares as number of index, which is the first value, numbers of 0, which is 2, and we are getting the square of 2, which will be 4. And then we are adding that to the variable sum of squares and increasing the index to 1. So now index will become 1, and here the numbers of 1 becomes the value 3, and we are getting 3 square, which is 9. And then we are adding the same sum to this sum of squares variable. Like that we are repeating until the length of numbers, and then we are adding all the squares of the numbers to a variable called sum of squares, and we are printing that once the loop is exited. So we have the output as 187. If you have any query, please let me know in the comment section below. Now while loop with else, just like if else condition, if the condition for while loop is false, then it will execute the piece of code that is present inside the else block. Technically you don't need to do this, but if you want you can do this. So let's take the same example. I am initializing the counter as 5, and while counter greater than 1, print Balaji is a great teacher, and we are decreasing the counter value by -1. And if the counter condition is failed in this while loop, it will go to the else and it will print counter reached. Until and unless this condition is failed, it will not execute this piece of cell. Now let's execute this. See, we have the counter value 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and the while loop condition got failed and it executed the else statement print. Cool. Now, as I mentioned before, you have to make sure that you always pass a condition which is converging at some point. If it is not, the loop will run infinitely. Let's say counter equal to 1, and while counter greater than 0, print infinite loop, and then increase the counter 1. So what is happening in this case? We initially initialized the counter as 1, and we are checking whether the counter is greater than 0 or not. Obviously 1 is greater than 0, right? And we are printing infinite loop. And in the next one, we are increasing the counter. So the counter value will become 2, and 2 will always be greater than 0, and then increase the counter to 3, and 3 is greater than 0. At any point, this counter value will be always greater than 0, and this condition will always be true, and it will never be false. If I execute this, it will keep on printing infinite loop, infinite loop, infinite loop, infinite loop. This is where your code will run indefinitely, and you will run out of memory issues. So make sure you don't write the piece of code like this way. That is everything that is there to learn about while loop. And make sure while you are giving the condition inside while loop, make sure it converges. Don't repeat your loop infinite times and go out of memory issues. Hopefully you learned something new in this video, and if you are liking what you're watching, please do subscribe and click that bell icon to get notified daily. We'll meet you in the next video. Peace out. Bye bye.